but they were having to contend with strong winds and sub-zero temperatures. He was reminded of what Annie had said to him as they snuggled up in bed in the early hours. "The weather forecast is pretty dire, James. Is there any chance you can get someone to cover for you so that you can start your Christmas a day early?" It had been tempting, but he decided that it wouldn't have been fair on his colleagues, especially DI Phil Stevens and DS Jessica Abbott. They were taking charge through Christmas Day and Boxing Day, and he knew for a fact that they'd both made plans for today. At least it hadn't been a stressful shift, and there'd been no call for him to leave the office. DC Colin Patterson had attended the mugging of a pensioner in Ambleside, and DC Caroline Foley had driven to Sedbergh to interview a woman who'd claimed she'd been threatened by her ex-husband. They were both back now, and like him, they'd be heading home in the next hour or so, after the night shift officers reported for duty. Hopefully they weren't going to be delayed by the inclement weather. James returned to his desk and started tidying the paperwork that covered it. It still felt strange not to be out there in the open plan office with the rest of the team, even after 9 months. It was back in April when he was promoted from Detective Inspector to Detective Chief Inspector, filling the shoes of Jeff Tanner, who himself got promoted to Superintendent and was now based at Constabulary Headquarters in Penrith. James's promotion was unexpected, but not unwelcome. Having served as a police officer for over 20 years, most of it with the Met in London, he'd felt more than ready to take the next step up the career ladder. He often wondered where he'd be now if he'd stayed in the capital. The move to Cumbria came about after Annie's mother died, leaving her the 4-bedroom family cottage in Kirkby Abbey. By then, Annie had lived in London for 13 years, but it had got to the point where she'd no longer felt comfortable there. Street crime, unbearable levels of traffic, and the urge to start a family, but in a safer environment, had persuaded her that they should relocate to the place she grew up. James came around to her way of thinking after he started to receive death threats from a violent criminal, and so they upped sticks and headed north. At first, he feared he wouldn't adjust to being a copper in Cumbria, a county with one of the lowest crime rates in the country, but much to his relief, he'd found the job far from boring. In fact, since moving here, he'd had to grapple with 3 of the biggest and most disturbing cases of his career. And the fact that they had all taken place each year around Christmas time was the reason he'd come to secretly dread the festive season. "Sorry to bother you, Gov, but something has come in that you need to be made aware of." The voice snapped him out of his reverie, and he looked up to see DC Foley standing in the open doorway. She was the newest recruit to the team, a tall 29-year-old who had transferred from Carlisle 6 months ago. "What is it, Caroline?" he asked her. "I don't know the details, but it doesn't sound good," she said. "Colin answered a call from control and then signalled for me to come and get you. He's still talking to them, but he held up his notepad on which he'd scribbled 4 people missing." Those words sent a cold rush of blood through James's veins, and he shot straight to his feet. "Lead the way," he said to DC Foley, and then followed her out of the room and across the office to Colin Patterson's workstation. Patterson was still on the phone, scrawling notes on his pad as he listened intently. He now had the full attention of everyone in the office: 1 other detective, 2 uniformed officers, and 3 civilian support staff. James could see the tension etched into their features as they waited anxiously for Patterson to finish the call. Another 30 seconds passed before he put down the phone and looked up, his face pinched with concern. 4 men and their dogs who went for a hike early this morning have been reported missing, he said. They set out between 7 and 8 and were supposed to have returned to their homes early this afternoon. The call came in from a woman named Maria Payne, who's the wife of one of the men. She says they're all experienced hikers, so the fact that they've not been in touch to warn that they'll be late and none of them can be reached on their mobiles has given her cause for concern.